Did you see this one?
Oh, yeah.
No, I didn't see that
Very
one.
sweet. Yes, that's very sweet.
When was that taken?
That is not the one I wanted to pull out.
There's
That's the one that she pulled out.
Is this you, Marie?
Marie.
Oh,
There
my
was
God.
some,
Oh, yeah.
Western
No.
Union telegrams
Marie,
over here that
you look
might
better.
want to
Not a
put
woman.
on.
Well, I
Oh,
look
this
better
one.
now. I love it. I
Well, this
love
one
it.
they used in the
Yeah,
recruiting
yeah,
video.
yeah. See something, yeah.
Yeah, I love.
Oh, she's gonna show that.
No,
I
I worked at AT&T for a year before I went into Peace Corps, believe it or not. And
I
they
did
had,
not.
they
No.
did a story on me
I
when
know
I was
his name.
Very
And
good.
then when I was
Yeah.
overseas,
He'll
they
get a
got in touch
Pulitzer
with
one
me
of
and they
these
sent a
days,
photographer
not
from
Yeah.
Black
Love
Star
it, love it.
Photography down
Okay.
to record my life so
Look
they
at her
could do
showing
another
that picture
article.
You've
So
seen
they
it.
did this
No.
whole, like every, you know,
They did
where's
this
the
whole thing
house.
on you?
So beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, they followed, the guy followed me around all day, you
Very
know,
nice.
getting
Oh.
water
Yeah.
and the thing, using the toilet, you know, the
Yeah.
bath.
Oh, they showed you, oh, okay, okay.
You know, not using the school, the bus that you took to school. So I have this wonderful, then they gave them
You're
all to
lucky.
my, they used a couple of them in
Lucky,
the
yeah.
article, then they gave them all to my mother,
Oh,
who gave them to
sweet.
me. So
Don't
that's
even-
how I got this collection. So it's like a day in the life, you know, back in, here, like here we are in the market buying rice.
Yeah.
And talk about the Peace Corps recruitment poster.
Oh, that was Peru. There was a great,
Oh, was it?
yeah,
Oh.
it was Chimbote. Chimbote.
Oh, okay.
And that was the one that was
Yeah.
before Peace Corps, after Peace Corps, this
Yeah.
sort of wretched-looking town.
Yeah, right,
So did you see this one of Betty?
yeah. I mean, that is a model.
And Winnie.
Oh, boy.
A model.
And Winnie Blatchford and Susan Biddle, they did this one day, yeah.
Yeah.
One, yeah.
Oh, wonderful,
Uh-huh.
Betty.
I mean,
Where
there's
was
just
that,
such an
Betty?
elegant
Where was that shown?
smile
Where
you
was
have.
that appearing? In what?
In, Ladies Home Journal.
Oh, my
Yeah.
word.
Oh, Ladies Home Journal.
Uh-huh.
Part, yeah.
Of it. So here's Blatchford, Joe Blatchford, the
Yeah.
director, yeah. And it was taken down by the ellipse.
That's your
Beautiful
priest
day.
lot.
Uh-huh.
When the grass grew.
True, yeah. Wonderful, wonderful.
Was he a
Enjoyable
priest?
time.
Who? Blatchford?
Blacksburg. No,
No,
I don't think
He was
so.
head of action.
Well, Peace
This
Corps,
is
Peace
a
Corps.
wonderful photo, though.
That
I mean,
is
that's
wonderful.
a prize to
Definitely
have a
yours.
picture
Yeah.
like that with
Yeah,
stars.
he
you
did
know?
that one.
He said when we went to
Look at that
Tunisia,
hand.
I sent him a telegram saying, a study reveals no present tense in Arabic. What'll I do now? And he said, don't look back.
Smart, very good,
Oh,
very good.
sorry.
Sorry.
Oh,
That's a
Yeah.
wonderful.
Because you went in
I
19.
have no relationship with Blatchford.
Yeah, you went in 1963.
Oh, we'll talk
I'm
about
glad
that.
of it.
In a good way.
Now, I want to know what this is, where you have your sort of chin out like you're,
Oh, that's
like you're challenging somebody.
Wow.
Or is that not,
That's,
you look almost
Who
like
are
you're,
these two people?
yeah, belligerent.
yeah, you look
Yeah,
almost like
now
you're
this is
taking.
Habib Bourguiba,
Oh,
Oh, my
God.
heavens, yes, it
and
is.
that's the ambassador, Russell.
Ah.
Oh, Ambassador Russell, because he was
Tunisia.
still there when I was there.
Was he?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
And I have a
Small
photo
world.
upstairs of my
Small
family, we
world.
cut him out of it.
Yes, you better speak up.
Cut him out of
Oh,
it.
he was a wonderful man.
Oh, you bet he was.
So he was researching, the original Hannibal War in Tunis.
what am I doing here? Or something, you know.
Oh, and you have no
that there's no
correspondence.
job, is this, that, and then you get this telling you you're representing, you know, the finest.
Yeah,
Of course,
yeah,
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Well, and as you moved to the Vietnam War, then that became even a more
Yeah.
important kind of an issue.
Yeah, there was very much a patriotism
Oh,
angle
yeah.
to this.
But there was no other place to serve your country except the military when the Peace Corps
Wow.
was
Pretty
created.
amazing.
Right.
It is.
Externally.
Not for the country, foreign service again, I
Yeah.
guess, but there weren't many women officers, were there at that
No.
time?
No,
Almost none.
no. I think I looked yesterday and when Carol Lace arrived in
Yeah.
Nepal as ambassador,
Wow, forget about that.
Yeah,
there were only 5 ambassadors.
I'm
There was
even
way
I'm even surprised there were that many.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
tell you the truth. That was 60.
Because if you were married to a foreign service officer, you had to give up your foreign
That's right.
service.
Whoa.
You had to leave
Yeah,
it.
I know a number of women who did that too,
Yeah.
and then they went back years later when they
Yeah.
opened it up again.
Jane Coon was one of them.
She was
Who?
one, yeah.
Jane Coon,
Okay, I think that.
yeah.
But Debbie, there were only 3 women country directors when I met you at the Peace Corps.
Yeah, probably.
And I
Then there
owe-
were 32.
I owe who I am to Nancy Graham.
Oh, that's true.
Here,
Yeah.
here.
Yeah,
We all are.
Because Nancy
Wait, but did she
hired,
recruit you?
yeah, Nancy recruited me.
Yeah, but Debbie was the one who walked into my office the day I arrived. The stack of resumes that tall, you know, all women.
Yeah,
And she said, this is your job.
Thank you,
Yes,
Debbie.
ma'am.
And you
And you did it.
Very good.
Well, I'll
did.
tell you another story on that, just updating. In 1996, 97, I don't know, 96, when I was asked to act as the regional director for Africa, we had 26 countries, and just, the business of getting women or minorities into these really requires consciousness, what is it called, mindfulness?
Mindfulness.
And effort, right?
Right.
And none of the guys who ran these regions were awful guys or didn't like women or whatever, but there were 26 countries and there were 22 white male country directors. That was 1996.
Yeah.
Now, within 2 years, we got that half and half, I think. But you have to make,
You have to make it happen.
But I mean,
Yeah,
in that.
but like you did in
that was a
19, that's what I'm
reversal
saying.
from the 70s.
Yeah, but I mean, I
But
think
it
this
fell
thing
back again.
fluctuates all the time,
Yeah.
because if you're not minding the store,
Right,
and if you don't have advocates,
right.
who are kind of pushing, it easily slides the other way.
It's
Because
self-selection.
when you look for people with experience overseas, et cetera, you're gonna find a lot of men, because
Right.
they were the ones who had a lot of the, background.
No, but interestingly, up to like 74, when I came back from Africa to head the placement office, the only women Peace Corps directors in Africa had PhDs. And there were male directors that had high school degrees out there. So.
Politically appointed?
That's what the call was.
Well, yeah, because it's all,
Yeah, the White House approval.
because it was all political appointees at that point.
Yes.
So you had to go through all your hurdles, including going through White House personnel. And when I was regional director in the 80s, every candidate had to go through White House personnel, and I got turned down on many candidates because of White House personnel.
That's
right, that was it.
They don't do that now, do they?
Oh, no, the law changed in 1987 thanks to Rep. Ruby.
Very good.
But I remember when I would interview candidates that had come over from the White House because they had wanted to be ambassadors. And this was second class if you didn't get the ambassador.
He's good
A little
And I-
different set of.
And I used to say, well, are you ready to go to a country where where there's open sewers? Are you ready to go to a country where the rats are running down in the background? Are you ready to go to countries
And there's
where...
no limousine.
Yeah, that's right. And there are no toilets
There's
whatsoever.
no immunity from anything.
And I was talking to a woman, who had been head of the Republican Party somewhere, and she said, "Wow, I can go for that. I was raised on this farm," and she started about tromping around on the things, and I went, "Oh my heavens, I need to change."
Little
All girls are
different,
coming in.
yeah.
But what's interesting too, though, now, is that when we went in the early 60s into
Yeah.
Peace Corps, they were more men than women, right? Nowadays, women make up what? It's a
60.
very high percentage.
Yeah.
And so you also have more women who have been volunteers, who then move up into staff positions too. So you have a bigger pool of people with
Yeah.
Peace Corps experience.
Yeah, because it's 60% women, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we need to talk about this in a few minutes too, but, was there a discussion at the beginning that, women shouldn't be volunteers?
Yes.
Was it assumed immediately that
There
women
were,
would be?
there were a lot of positions that were not open to women. And when I became head of placement in '74, I would say probably more than 50% of the country requests from the Peace Corps country offices had restrictions on women serving in Peace Corps jobs. And we were able to change that, making that almost impossible for countries to do that. Unless, there was something really specific, but I mean, they were out of agriculture, out of, fisheries,
Water,
out of
sanitation.
all kinds of things that were just seemed to us absurd.
Probably
to me as
fisheries.
well.
I bet they were out of fisheries.
Oh, yeah, they were out of inland fish farming.
Well, in the spring of '61, when Sarge Schreiber was just putting all the pieces together, he got letters. I was over at the archives a few years ago, but reading the letters. But he was getting letters from Congress saying women should not be recruited to be Peace Corps volunteers, and largely not even be staff. And you read in the letters from Sarge Schreiber his advocacy for women will go, but many on the Hill were very nervous about any young American going overseas because of The Ugly American was out, and are we gonna ruin the US's reputation? But particularly, no, you can't send women, they cannot represent this United States. And to read the intensity of Sarge Schreiber's letter saying, yes, women are gonna do this.
Well, I hope this is, I read that women there were always,
Much
that's,
more.
well, this
I
is
think we're going
the
to-
rise of the Islamist movement. in Tunisia.
Absolutely,
Which
and
did
she's
not
a
exist
very
in Tunisia.
modern
Did not
Tunisian
exist in Tunisia.
Right, and now,
Arabic woman.
All right, Jody, if you,
Yeah,
we're gonna
okay.
start on Jody, I think, as a start.
That's why I'm here.
Well, us rich and famous people will write resumes, will write letters for you.
There we go, I like that.
Let me see it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay. You know, a couple of years ago, when we were doing research for the 50th anniversary of Peace Corps, I was lucky enough to go to the archives and read Schreiber's letters. And these were the letters he wrote between January and June of 1961. And one of the surprises for me, because I didn't even have this in my head at the time, was the back and forth in his letters between him and the members of Congress about women as Peace Corps volunteers. And the congressional people were writing him saying, wait a minute, as you're thinking this through, women should not be Peace Corps volunteers, and we don't really even see women as staff. And reading Sarge Schreiber's letters, the power, the energy in those letters, back to, you know, the speakers and the committee chairs that are in charge of putting Peace Corps together, saying, yes, women are part of Peace Corps, and women will be part of that first group.
well, what I remember at the time, being a volunteer at that time, or volunteering at that moment, was that Eleanor Roosevelt, of all people, came out with her reservations about women in the Peace Corps, particularly because of fears of sexual assault. I think she used the word rape. But, so, yeah, it wasn't within the Peace Corps necessarily, but it was certainly part of the administration.
Well, I think it was a tone, you know, as you were hearing the letters, reading the letters, I wasn't hearing them, but as I was reading the letters, it was more about, well, women don't do that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're just reminding you, Sarge, that women don't do this. And so Sarge was reminding them, yes, women do. So it's not we don't like or dislike women, it's just they don't belong in this activity. This isn't what women do.
Well, I think that Sarge and President Kennedy were actually pretty much in touch with that issue. I mean, they all came from families that had, you know, strong women in them, and so forth. But you know, I think the thing on the women's, or the girls as we were called, on our side was, I mean, here we come out of the 50s, you know, it's kind of a stable, blah sort of period, and suddenly there's a presidential debate, and here's this glorious, young, charming man with soaring rhetoric and so forth running for the presidency. And then somewhere along the campaign trail, March 1st, I think it was, in Michigan, he says, well, you know, I'm thinking about starting a program to let young people go abroad and represent the nation and you know, work in in other countries, let's say. I mean, this was an amazing thing to hear. I remember, you know, saying, I'm signing up right now. I mean, he hadn't even won the election. And I think that was the riveting thing for so many of the people, at least that I knew, that wanted to go in. There was just no question you wouldn't do this. It was an opening, an opportunity, a way to represent your country. It was something new. It was adventure. It was risk. It was all of these wonderful things that got the blood flowing. And so that's what I see when I think of the very early days of the Peace Corps.
I guess just, Debbie, picking up
I'm
on
gonna
that.
stop you just for 1 second, because whenever you guys are ready.
Okay. So, Debbie, I just wanted to add, and this is just to put this in some kind of context. When Kennedy spoke to that crowd for, 3 minutes, and there were something like 10,000 people. The women who were there because the Dean of Women had allowed them to go beyond their curfew, and they did not have to be in the dorms at 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that was that was the way it was.
Well, that's right, those are the times. I mean, you know, in college, we had to be in at a certain time, we had to get a late pass. I mean, it's just how the world was. I don't think the Peace, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't think the Peace Corps was particularly different, except that I think it was maybe a little bit more enlightened at the Shriver, you know, Kennedy level, and I'm sure not at the congressional level.
No.
Certainly at the Cow Palace, Kennedy spoke about both men and women going over.
Yeah.
I was going to pick up, Debbie, on your comment, because when I went to Thailand about 8 years ago, and I brought together the over 50 Peace Corps volunteers, of which there were 18. And we were all having lunch together, and the majority of them were women. And I went around the table and I asked them, what motivated you to join the Peace Corps? Because so we were in the 50, 60 age group, great. All but one said, I remember Kennedy's words. Here is the challenge. This is what you can do for your country. And said, life got in the way, and now I'm doing it. But I'm doing it because of Kennedy. This one woman who didn't answer it that way said, I was growing up in the Philippines, and my aunt used to host Peace Corps volunteers. Maybe she hosted you. And as I was a kid, I thought, I want to do that, but I'm Filipino. So she married an American, came to the U.S., had 2 children, divorced the American, and at age 50, she got her U.S. citizenship, and she said, now I can do it. And she was now a Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand. But it all came still from Kennedy, and the memory of Kennedy and the energy of Kennedy was touching these volunteers 7, 8, 9 years ago.
I think Debbie, you know, she talked about the rhetoric of Kennedy, and it was you know, mesmerizing, and you were ready to go marching off, you know, like, it was sort of like the Pied Piper, you know. But, you know, he said, I remember, he said things like, you know, let's be, peacemongers instead of warmongers. I think that was some of it, and, wow, you know, that was wonderful. Let's do this together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so women did go out in the first groups.
Well, my group, which was Philippines 1, there were more women than men, not by a large margin, but there were more. But it was an education project. So if you look at roles women play in society, that was a natural for the women volunteers. Tanganyika were roads, they were the first, Tanganyika and Colombia were the first 2. Colombia was community development, male, out there.
Yeah.
They rode horses, you know, around. And Tanganyika was road surveying. And building roads, I think, but they were either engineers or people that measured something that sounded like they could survey a road. So they were all male.
Now Ghana, which was the first where they actually landed in country, and that was about half women. And the significance of, you know, landing that very first group, and they sang the Ghanaian national anthem in Twi, and that made national headlines across the world. That Americans would do that in Twi.
And in defense of horse riding, I trained the first group that went to Lesotho, and they all learned how to ride horses, whether they were men or women. They worked in the mountains.
Does anybody else have anything we want to add to this aspect of the women and Nancy?
Nancy, you should add something here.
But no, you're fine. Wherever you are.
Oh, yeah.
The unfortunate, maybe, or negative parts of development work that we as women without a consciousness of ourselves as women brought to the table was that we didn't recognize, nor did the development planners who were much more sophisticated than we were. We didn't recognize the role that women played in grassroots environments in, say, places like Africa. I mean, we thought of the men as the farmers. We didn't understand that the women played significant roles, for instance, in farming. It took a long time for that to come about, and I think it was somewhat simultaneous with an awakening of you know, the women role in the world changing. I just always thought that was an important kind of thing, because we blithely went about just, listening to the rhetoric of let's train the male farmers, let's help the male farmers. I mean, the women control grain storage and all manner of aspects of farming, which of course in Africa was the way that most people lived.
Debbie, when did the Women in Development program start?
73.
Well, that was the sort of realization that, yes, it's the women who did the.
Well, that was the yes, that in
Yeah.
the Peace Corps headquarters. That was 73.
Right.
Yeah.
And say more, it was based on the Percy Amendment. And Debbie, you had some input into getting that into the Peace Corps legislation.
Yeah, no, I started the first Women in Development, well, I guess it was the Women in Development Coordinator, the first one, and then one of the things that I was able to accomplish was to get the Peace Corps legislation changed to include language of the Percy Amendment, which essentially said that U.S. dollars should be used to tend to integrate women into development economic activities in foreign countries. So, but it was kind of the time, and it was on the curve, and I think Peace Corps is very good at that.
And I think, didn't Lorette Rupe choose Lael Stiegel to run that program for a while?
I think Lael was there, and
Paula Goddard, I think, came along.
Yeah, Paula, yeah.
really, yeah.
I think
I
she
just don't know. I sort of lost.
Well, let's concentrate.
Ready?
Okay. Well, this was early Carolyn Payton. And Gretchen Hanwerker appointed me to be talent search director. And I came in, got to my desk, and Debbie Harding came marching down the hall with a pile of resumes, all women. And she said, this is what we want to do. Put them down. And I began going through them. And you have to learn how to read women's resumes. I mean, I remember Gretchen said she was asked by some journalist how she got to be an administrator. And she said, I had a husband, a house, and 3 children. That was her answer. And that's true. And when you read resumes, you know that about most women. Then you also know that if you're running the PTA and you have a $500,000 budget, you're a volunteer, but you have a big job, So you learn how to read resumes, and that was really the trick. We just went through and translated the resume into something that was saleable. Yeah.
Well, and I just want to say, I'm the result of you doing that.
That's true.
Here,
One
because it was
one of the good
Nancy that-
results.
I mean, you're the one that hired me to go to Tokyo.
That's true. That's true.
I also wanted to, because I know that, as you were mentioning earlier, that very few women were country directors, and there was just real nervousness about women being country directors.
Mm-hmm.
When I was regional director, I went to Oman, and a woman Peace Corps country director in Oman had just finished her tour and had left. And here is Oman, an Arab country in the Arabian Peninsula, and she was one of only 5 country directors in the world, and Peace Corps had the courage, so to speak, in whatever the attitudes were at that time, for her to be in Oman. Well, what I discovered is that she became, as Peace Corps country director, a national treasure in Oman, and was invited everywhere and participated and very much beloved. And as part of her time there, she actually had twins. And the whole country got involved in the process of her having twins and being a working woman in Oman with twins and being able to continue that role. And it was others that were telling me the impact that she had on Oman because of being there at that time in that country.
That's a good story. That's a great story. Yeah.
Maureen, you were one of those many volunteers who came back, because I think Sarge really wanted volunteers to come back and work for the agency. And you worked for Charlie
Peavy. Yeah, Charlie
was head of the Office of Evaluation, which at that time did not mean evaluating volunteers. It was evaluating programs. Excuse me. And it was a very special office in Peace Corps. In terms of this gender issue, the evaluators were all male, and there were about a dozen of them, and they were fantastic guys. I mean, many of them are still my friends today. But the story, they all had a journalism background. And the legend has it that Shriver had said, I want to know what's going on over there before Time magazine does. So every year, every program was evaluated, overseas program, and there were these, reports written that were limited eyes only, and they would go to Sarge, and he would write all over them, etc. In the office, there were 12 evaluators, and there were 6 women who were called staff assistants. And this was a very high-level secretary. But you were told you could work with the evaluators, editing reports, and doing meaningful things, like planning trips, etc. I went in there as a staff assistant, and credit to Charlie Peters, a year later, more to him than to me, he promoted me to become an evaluator, which was quite something, because there had been the only female evaluator there had been was Betty Forsling Harris, who did not work in the office, but did a courtesy evaluation with one of the regular evaluators, I think, on her own. So this was a big thing. And the guys, who were all these tough journalists, were not keen on this girl, which I was, right, becoming an evaluator. But Charlie Peters was a great man, and he stood up for the idea, and I was the first, and then there were several others while I was there. But yeah, that's how I came back into Peace Corps. But I was there, it's a wonderful time, because Shriver was still running the place.
And Betty, I was going to say, let's move to Betty, so we'll... And so, she has a question for Betty, so David, we're going to be focusing on Betty for a minute.
So, Betty, you came to Peace Corps from USAID, right?
Yes.
You started out in the Africa region.
Yep.
Those lights.
All right, I'm ready.
Right there.
Okay, hold it,
At the end of the tree.
are you rolling, David?
Okay, so they don't,
That's your question, yes.
suddenly you see your room differently.
So, Betty, you came to Peace Corps from USAID.
I did.
You were in the Africa region, right?
Right. I got to Peace Corps by luck. I was at AID in a lovely job and got RIFT, which is the government word. And as I was going back on my old job, someone said they had an opening at Peace Corps. And unlike the rest of the ladies here, I was not as familiar with Peace Corps, but I said, I'll give it a try. So I interviewed with Walter Carrington to be his, I would say secretary, not staff assistant, thank you, and to be his secretary. And I was selected and loved it. And I said, I was telling you the first day I was on my interview, the lady I replaced was there, and they said, could you send a cable to Mogadishu? I said, Mogadishu? How will I ever learn how to spell that? But it came to you after a couple of weeks, you sort of, if you didn't know it, somebody would help you. That's one thing about Peace Corps. And I was at the Africa region, I guess, for maybe a year. And then the head secretary to the director of Peace Corps was leaving, and they had selected one lady, and she didn't work out. She said that she had done a project, and they wanted her to redo it, and she said it was their fault, so she left. So the vacancy occurred, and I was interviewed by Mel Nigerian, who at the time I think was Blatchford's, I want to say chief of staff, was probably more executive officer. And he interviewed me, and we had a good interview, I thought. And he told me at the time, from working in the Africa region, I had a nice big afro, which was very popular in the Africa region. He said down in the director's office, I could not have the afro or wear pants. So I decided I would get rid of the afro. So then I was able to wear my pants. But it was, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. It was good. Mel became a good friend.
Good, good.
Well, I remember, if I can just say one word, I remember you particularly in a number of roles at the Peace Corps, but I honestly remember just how nice you were and how cheerful. No, I mean this, Betty, and I had this experience with the director of Action when Betty was the executive secretary to Michael Balzano. When he called me in, he did not like the placement office at all. And he called me down there. I was shaking in my boots. And I walked into that office, this vast office,
and it was like the length of half a football field. And Betty was sitting at this big desk way at the end, and I sort of came in and I looked, and here was this very tender smile, like, I know this is going to be terrible. You're my friend outside the room. I never got over that. You were so sweet.
Well,
today.
thank you, Debbie. It
Well,
was,
it was true.
that was part of my job for that, during that time, yeah.
Well, you did it
Very good.
wonderfully.
Well, and you were there when Peace Corps was moved to Action, do you?
Yeah, that was with Blatchford, and they were, I called them the merger men, and unfortunately it was men who was doing all the merger. They would come in and meet, they would discuss what to do with the Peace Corps, and Blatchford, before he came Peace Corps, he was head of a group called Acción in South America, and he said it was coincidental that it became Action, but we think he pushed for it. And they would meet all the time, and it was watching them, and I didn't realize at the time there were no women there. It was just the men, and they proceeded.
And ironically, fast forward now to 1981, and we're at Rupee, female Peace Corps director, is when Peace Corps was able to fully separate from Action. So it was the men who put it together, and it was the women who brought.
Well, it was never a marriage that really worked. Peace Corps didn't want it, the others didn't want it, but we tried to make it work, and it just never worked. Never did.
Well, and Debbie, at that time, you were working on pulling Peace Corps out of Action, were you not? From the outside of Peace Corps?
I'm having trouble trying to remember. I left Peace Corps in '78 when Sam Brown fired a number of the women and Black Americans that we had all struggled to get into these high positions. And a lot of them were fired. Gretchen Handwerker was not. I was not. I was in the director's office at the time. Nor was Alan Yaffe. And so Yaffe and I quit in protest. And then I guess what happened, Dick Celeste came in after Peyton. And I know we were sort of helping him. I know we were helping Lorette because I remember I had to laugh when you were telling the story about Perdita coming to Togo, with a burqa on or something. I mean, Nancy and I had lunch with Lorette and some political people in Washington. Lorette came in with a thing up her hand, and she said, "I can't be seen with you people because we're all Democrats." But we were, and then the Peace Corps Institute was started as a response to the, explicit campaign statements of the Reagan campaign to defund the Peace Corps and Vista. And so Friends of Vista got started in the Peace Corps Institute, and I was hired to run that Peace Corps Institute, and that was, at least one of the explicit, if not transparent goals, was to make sure the Peace Corps survived. And so there was a lot of interaction with different people, including Lorette, to get it out of Action.
Well, I think in part because Lorette came in